Welcome to Implicating the Real. Today's show is part 2 of the conversation began in the previous episode. Let's get right into it. Hope you enjoy.
Rob's dad dies. Sad.
Was that in this chapter?
Yeah, that's a little ways forward, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we got to talk about the all that is.
All right. I think the paragraph before I wanted to read too, so I'll say, the soul is not a finished product. In fact, it is not a product in those terms at all, but a process of becoming. All it is not a product, finished or otherwise either. There are probable gods as there are probable men, but these probable gods are all a part of what you may call the soul of, or the identity of, all that is, even as your probable selves are all a portion of your soul or entity. It's interesting.
I just don't know what to make of that.
To me, it's just like the logical extension of like that tapestry of reality that he's talking about. The next paragraph is maybe a little more questionable to me because he says that we create probable gods. So, just read. The dimensions of actuality possible to all that is, of course, far exceed those presently available to you. In a manner of speaking, you have created many probable gods through your own thoughts and desires. They become quite independent psychic entities, validities in other levels of existence. The one all that is aware not only of its own nature and of the nature of all consciousness, but is also aware of its infinite probable selves. We go here towards subjects in which words become meaningless. The nature of all that is can only be sensed directly through the inner senses, or in weaker communication through inspiration or intuition. The miraculous complexity of such reality cannot be translated verbally.
Well,
yeah, the part I was referring to is, that we create many probable gods.
I think that, I don't remember where he said this. It might be, there's this recording online of Seth talking about like how all that is came to be. It might be that, or it might be the book called The Sanctuary, where he talks about how like in the beginning there was some conscious awareness, and they basically just thought of things, like created, I guess, stories or scenes or just imaginings.
Yeah.
And those became real and wanted their own like independence. And then so he or she or it loving them gave them that independence and like gave these beings the ability to also create. Like he said it in a way that implied that that was something that could happen. Like you couldn't create something that also can't create. Like, they have to also be creators. And so it's basically like this mega, what we think of God, spawning other gods and allowing them to each go their own way, where these gods, anything they think of, will also create gods in that sense.
Yeah.
I think that's what he means by like we create probable gods, because an example would be if we, say, wrote a fictional story like, say, Harry Potter. Then Harry Potter is created as a human whose thoughts also create reality. And then so Harry Potter becomes real in some other reality we don't perceive, and is dreaming things that create, other sentient, quote unquote, gods. That's the way I interpret it. I don't know if that's what he meant.
Yeah, I'm trying to refer back to this sentence over here. It is impossible for any being to be sterile, for any idea to die, for any ability to go unfulfilled. That kind of like hints at like everything is consciousness creating consciousness. Like the action of reality is just this free will, expanding, creating. I was trying to think of an adjective for like identity, but like identity just kind of becomes whatever it wants. Like part of the pluralization of reality is, parts of consciousness like identifying with smaller, limited versions of all that is, and vice versa.
I feel like it just makes this like polytheism that's like so expansive. Like it kind of reminds me of like trying to interact with like Hinduism, right? Where there's just like so many gods.
Yeah.
That you get to the point where you're just like, I don't care. Like
yeah.
Like the thing where that like Buddhists are like with gods, where they're like, yeah, there's gods, like it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like you might meet them, you might not, it doesn't matter. Where like, I feel like maybe just like coming from sort of like the American perspective where like most people are monotheist, like if something's a god, it's like important, But like from this perspective, it's sort of like the only reason you'd want to interact with a god is because it's a god that you like specifically fuck with. And you're like, you and me are like tight. I want to like hang out with this god. But if you just like met a different god, you'd be like, yeah, whatever, it's a god. Like, who cares?
It's the choice paralysis on the god level.
Yeah.
It's like, in the same way we probably don't think like people are that special because there's like 8 billion of them or whatever. But like all of us are like need and seek connections with other people, right?
Right.
So like, yeah, it's meaningful. Again, like in the choice of like an infinite choice of different gods, it's kind of back to that like boredom, like examining what you really want. You know, what God do I want to connect with?
Yeah.
And like, what does it mean to be that God? You know, to me, this like jumps in, and Seth really hasn't gotten into it in this book, but like value fulfillment, like that's just kind of like a primary aspect of reality, is like your own value fulfillment. And the way we're talking about like this infinity of Joes, but like you only identify with the ones that have similar values or make similar choices. Like value fulfillment has this profound influence on, you know, what reality is and how it unfolds. You know, I remember you were talking once about like just all the different saints in Catholicism, and I was joking like you get polytheism for the price of monotheism, but like you can pray to the patron saint of, you know, they have everything, but it's almost like, what does that God become? It becomes a representation of a value almost.
Well, that's what gods are, right? Because like Seth's talking about, like gods don't manifest in like actuality. Like you can only perceive them intuitively. It's like what I was talking about with like to be heroic means that you're like unwavering, you know? Like to be a god is that you are the essence of a thing. Like you're not, you know, petty. Or like you're petty, but like you have a core identity that is like solid. It's an idea. You know? And if you didn't have that, you wouldn't really be like a god, you know?
It's interesting in the aspect of like, you know, the monotheist wants God to be like unlimited. And by virtue of being a polytheist, like each god is like specified or is limited, right? And it also makes me think of like, I was really intrigued by the idea of like just reading, I don't know if it was like Homer or something, but like the gods were like jealous of mortals. And I was like, that's such a cool idea to think about, like how they could envy us. Like it's counterintuitive to like the culture I grew up with. Is like, you know, mortal is totally and always envious of God, right? Because it has everything.
Yeah, it sort of depends on like what limitations you think that they have or don't have, right? Because like we're talking about a tradition right now, like where presumably the idea of like being a person is that eventually you become a god, right? Like that's the whole point, is like we're gods in training or whatever. But like that implies a lot of choice, like in the Sethian point of view, you know? Like I feel like that sense of the idea of like what a god is and this sort of like polytheistic ancient perception of what a god is are like a little different, you know? Because like if you or I just like our entity becomes like quote unquote advanced to a certain level, and it's just like you've achieved like God status or whatever, it's like I feel like that's not really like symbolically standing in for like an idea in the way that like some of these gods like symbolically stand in for ideas, you know?
Yeah, I guess it makes me remember that Seth is always stressing that like individuality is always a part of reality. And so like, even if we are not saying it, there's like a specific idea but there is an individuality. I'm just trying to make sense, like when, you know, he says in a manner of speaking. So I guess that is a caveat. You have created many probable gods through your own thoughts and desires. So like in the sense, like Catholicism has created the patron saint of whatever. That saint exists on sort of a god level once our imagination has like sparked it into existence.
Because it says that what gods are in this chapter is like what? They're like individual probabilities of all that is?
I think the main point, and it's taken, is that like this same tapestry of reality is happening on all these levels. Even, you know, we normally think of the God level as like this ultimate, we can't even imagine it sort of level. And I think his main point is saying that this reality creation, the same effect is happening at that level. You know, by virtue of like us having this idea of God kind of is defining what this part that we can't even imagine kind of like tells us we're limited to understand what's going on there. But in the same way that like I was just saying, I was intrigued by the idea of like these Greek gods being jealous of mortals. Like he's kind of saying like the soul is almost greater than these gods in a way.
Well, how so?
Well, let me reread this paragraph. Maybe I'm mistaken. The soul is not a finished product. It is, in fact, it is not a product in those terms at all, but a process of becoming. All that is not a product, finished or otherwise either. There are probable gods as there are probable men, but these probable gods are all part of what you may call the soul of, or the identity of all that is, even as the probable selves are a portion of your soul, our entity. So like the soul is kind of the totality of all these probabilities at the God level and the I don't know, whatever our level is.
Right, where presumably like there's a world soul that is everything,
Yeah.
but like in soul form. But then like different probabilities of how that world soul can be are what we would call gods, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's just like ultimately it's an arbitrary way of like just defining some sort of hierarchy of.
Yeah, it's a parallelism. It's like as above, so below, right? It's like the way that gods work is the same way that your soul works.
Mm-hmm. This about does it for this session, right?
Yeah.
Next one. Probabilities are an ever-present portion of your invisible psychological environment. You exist in the middle of the probable system of reality. It is not something apart from you. To some extent, it is like a sea in which you have your present being. You are in it, and it is in you. It's like that last sentence, too, that kind of touches on what we're kind of saying, like the gods are part of the soul. Or like, you know, it reverses the hierarchy a little bit in the same way we were just speaking of.
Mm-hmm. I always run into a problem whenever Seth uses the word probabilities. Because I feel like Seth just uses them in a different way than like you would usually use the word probabilities.
Yeah, because he means other actualities.
Right.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like the fact that things can be different ways.
I respect you're taking issue with that. That's kind of me with whatever issue I was having with Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah.
It's just like poor phrasing in my opinion.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Liana?
I think he was just working with the vocabulary at the time.
I mean, they're probabilities in the sense that from our perspective, they're probabilities. But he's using that term while constantly telling us that they're real reality for the parts of the subjective beings that are in those probabilities.
Yeah.
Did part of like your undergrad or something, like you use that term like philosophically in a certain way or something?
I mean, I just had classes where I studied statistics, you know, and it's like,
so it's coming from there.
What's the probability of this outcome from this event? And it's just like, well, what are the options? And then you define the options, and then you're like, well, this option happens half the time, so the probability of it happening is 1 in 2. This option happens 1 out of 6 times, so its probability of happening is 1 in 6. You know, like it's weird. Like philosophically, it's weird and interesting to talk about the fact that like things and events can have this sort of like weird quality of probability to them, which is like kind of like reality, but not really. Mm-hmm. It's like manifest possibility in reality. And that's weird. So I get why, like, if you're talking about like spiritual, like metaphysical stuff, like probabilities are an interesting topic.
Yeah.
It's just like defining what the word probability, like saying like, you know, like probabilities are an ever present portion of your psychological environment. It's like, what does that mean? Your psychological environment? How about my physical environment?
I think he means like probable worlds, but what word choice would you have picked in the 70s/60s to describe probable other courses of action?
Like I can't use like other possible worlds or whatever?
I guess you could, but with the understanding that it's going to be a really verbose noun clause. It's going to be bitchy to write.
I think to some extent it's literally like a classic definition 1, definition 2. You know, like our words have multiple meanings in this way.
Right.
And I was going to say, like, later in this chapter, I think I made a note, but like a lot of this is just talking about decisions and like what it means and what the implications are. But I think he's using the word probabilities as distinct from possibilities, because there's only, well, it may be technically true that like we can go in any possible direction by virtue of like hanging on to this past or like having the experiences we've had. We have like a narrower band of more probable paths.
This is the thing. Yeah. This is what I would want to highlight, right? Is like the difference between possibility and probability. Because like what Seth's describing to me sounds like kind of just like open to whatever. It's just like it's possible. Like he's not talking about things that are more or less probable, right? Because like you were bringing up the idea of like, well, is there something to like in half of the worlds you would choose to like be with this partner? And it's like, well, Seth hasn't said anything about that. The way Seth talks about it, it's like so open-ended that it just seems like anything you can imagine is just a thing, which is like, well, how do you attach a probability statement to that? Like, how do you define the probability of something then, you know? Because like if you're doing statistics, like the probability of something is defined in terms of like the limitation of options that you have. And in this worldview that has no limitation of options, it's like there's
That's the thing though. The limitation is whether or not you think of it. So if I don't know, some random kid from the 1500s never heard of the idea of Transformers because they didn't have robots back then, that is not a possibility to him because he doesn't know that his friend calling on his fucking can attached to a string, going to his house, ending in another can, is not going to like turn into a Transformer because neither of them know what the hell Transformers are. That is not a possibility in that like space time. It's not even a probability because it's just not a possibility because he's not going to think of that.
But like for Seth, there's no distinction between possible things and probable.
Except what you think of. If it's never going to occur to you, it's not a probability.
But like each possible version of you also creates possibilities, right? Like they butt off of each other ad infinitum.
Right.
So like the probability of anything happening is just like one, you know?
I don't think he means that every single possible action will occur, but that the ones that are geared to your like emotions, desires, predilections are probable, but only if you think of them. And even in that limited subset, you are still creating infinite probabilities.
I was going to mention this later in the chapter too, because it references this somewhere. But I think this is the struggles even Seth has with like doing these predictive experiments that Jane and Rob always wanted to do throughout their books, which, a lot of Seth readers just kind of roll their eyes at because it's this kind of like boring, mundane, and this like obsessive need for like physical validation. But like for him to predict like what might happen requires him to like sift through the place that all these different elements are at when he's at the same time saying like everything has free will to like take these different choices. Like what I'm trying to highlight here is that like I think he's using the word probabilities instead of possibilities. Let's say, listener, imagine like possibilities is like a 360 degrees direction and probabilities is like, like a 40-degree direction. Like you, by virtue of having your experience and your past and your beliefs, you narrow down the possible into this probable like array. You can go in any direction in these 40 degrees. Those are more probable.
Well, specifically, if it's 40 degrees, then we can do the math, right, and figure out what portion of the possible is that, right? And that's what matters.
Well, I'm using these terms and statistics have to too, but I don't know if that's like necessarily valid, like just applying numbers to them.
Well, let me just describe it with numbers quick, because I think that this is a succinct way of putting it, right? You're talking about there being like infinite probabilities, right? But like the probability of something can't be infinite. You can't say like, what's the probability that I do this thing and something happens? It's not, the answer can't be infinity. The probability has to be like one or less, right?
Right. And what Michael is describing with the 45 degrees, that is one. The probability of something in the 45 degrees happening is one because the one becomes the all. He's saying that the other, 360, 315 degrees, that those are not possible. That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying is the difference between probable and possible. Right. The other 315 is not actually possible because whatever that person is, their predilections and preferences are not ever going to go to the 315 degrees.
And this is like the problem I have with this whole concept of like possibility, right? It's like you're collapsing possibility from a thing that is like a maybe to a thing that's a certainly, Like that's what like the reification of possibility does, is it defeats the concept of what possibility means. Like possibility means like potential, but not necessarily actual. Whereas you're saying like, well, if something's possible, then it is actual,
Well, I'm even saying like, even if you go outside of this 45 degrees or 40 degrees, like it's representative that it is like a reversal. You know what I mean? Like in the visual representation of like looking forward, I'm holding out my arms and at angles here, and like everything before me, there's an infinite gradation of what we're talking about is probabilities here. It's probable that I'm going to take one of these paths from this position, but it's still possible that I take the one that's 180 degrees behind me. But
what makes
it's representative that it's way less probable, and so it doesn't make sense to call that a probability.
Yes, it does.
I disagree with what you're saying.
Right.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Isn't
what
the case.
a probability is even if it's a low probability, it's a probability.
Right, but I'm saying like there's utility in defining what's most probable, and that happens to be
sure as a number that's the biggest number in your probability. Like, if you have a probabilities, but one of them of like, you have like 6 different options and like one of them is 60%, then you're like, okay, like even all of the other ones combined are not a higher probability than this one happening.
right.
And that's why that number is utile, right?
Yeah, but what's the issue?
Well, the issue is like, okay, I understand sort of, or like metaphorically, like what you're talking about with this, like you have the wedge of like what's in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of like space-time like diagrams where you like have sort of like a wedge of like potential action?
I haven't heard of them, but
So like this is a thing that you can do. It's sort of like a theoretical way of like describing like how like travel through space-time would work, where it's like you can define on a page sort of like a wedge that starts at your present location. And you can see that the further out you get, the more options you have, right? But each one of those depends on the one that came before it. And that's because each place that you could go is limited by speed of light, right? So like the lines that define your wedge are like the furthest you could travel in any given direction at the speed of light. And then everything inside the wedge is like stuff you could get by going at like a tangent or like going slower or like, going in a curve or like whatever, right? The reason that makes sense is because everything outside the wedge is physically impossible, right? And like what you're doing is you're like defining like, okay, there's this like 45 degrees where it's more probable that I'm going to go, but I always could go backwards. So like really any direction is still possible.
mm-hmm.
The problem is that like possibility doesn't really make sense as a concept unless you also have impossibility. And like under the Sethian concept, I don't know if you have the idea of impossibility, like what's something that's impossible to like a Sethian?
He has said when doing predictions for people in class that, and he doesn't do this for everyone, he will only tell somebody that something will happen if it will happen. Because other times they are in such a mental state that they could choose between 2 paths. And in that situation, he won't say, he won't make any strong predictions. So I mention this because like I think he literally means that if something is probable, it's that like you have already ruled out things that are not possible. Those are paths that person will never take. But that doesn't mean that person does not have infinite probable futures or selves, because you can still have infinity. Like infinity, I guess, could be seen as a subset of also infinity.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Like infinity is a subset of infinity.
Yes. So we are talking about probable futures, which is a subset of possible futures. My point is there is a distinction between those 2 words, and there is a good reason that Seth chose probable.
Yeah.
He says that the dimensions of actuality possible to all that is, of course, far exceed those presently available to you. As in, there's a lot more shit that's possible, but you're just working with what's probable. I don't think it was a careless choice of words.
I guess part of what I was trying to define with like this visual 365 representation is that like getting back to what we were just saying about like this provocative idea of like changing your past, like to me that was like having this tail or wake is kind of like what's orienting toward these 45 degrees rather than those 45 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this, by having this ability to change probabilities at any point, presumably, like we hang on to this belief that the past is a historic continuity that is propelling us in this one direction. But like if we're taking this at face value, we change our past, it's less probable that we're going to do that because of our beliefs and the way we're oriented, and maybe what we came here to do doesn't imply that. But like that's why I'm saying that I don't know if it's technically impossible for us to change completely out of this field of like if Seth was going to predict like which direction we're going, it's going to fall into these 45 degrees because perhaps he can see our entity and how we've set up like certain events that are supposed to happen, and knows like what sort of developments we came in this life looking for and how we're oriented in that direction. So it doesn't mean like completely different paths are impossible, but just very unlikely.
But he says that there are some things that are impossible for us physically.
Yeah, I don't mean to imply
So that's
that
not a
like,
probable future.
Yeah, I don't mean to imply that like there isn't anything that's impossible. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I feel like a lot of this depends on like we have to like just really step out of our like black and white thinking. We can't use words like possible, impossible, infinity without there being different gradations. You know, like in the same way
that's the point, right? Is that like possibility is a gradation, whereas impossibility is not, you know?
I'm still curious to hear what word you think he should have chosen instead of probable.
I mean, I guess I'm still trying to sort of grapple with what he's even saying, you know? Like, I could come up with a word if I knew what he was talking about, but I feel like at the end of the day, like,
But then
it all kind of becomes moot, you know?
if you don't know exactly what he's trying to define, how can you take issue with the word he chose to define it?
Because I do know what probability means.
Well,
Yeah, but like language does change, and sometimes, especially when you're talking about concepts that are bigger than what we know, what would you do except for come up with like a variable named X? Like if I say to a material scientist all that is, you think he's really going to think about what Seth thinks of all that is? Like what if that material scientist says to me, no, that shit is not possible according to my worldviews, and therefore you are choosing a really poor noun clause to describe this thing. And I'd be like, but you don't even know what I'm talking about.
I mean, didn't we hit on it earlier when he just means other actualities? Isn't that like a decent enough term to be more specific?
Yeah, right. You could just be like, your other existences or like other dimensional.
But
like
I think he's using the word probabilities because they're probabilities from our perspective, from the subject of this one ego and this one reality.
I agree. I think that it's a matter of like, he said that right before you choose, all like your friend calls you on the phone and asks you to go out that night. At that point, they're all probable until you choose. But we are still going to refer to those three other choices as probabilities, even though they are no longer probabilities because we chose one. Like, for example, if I say, okay, lady, you froze like 5 embryos. This one embryo, let's just say I'm a psychic, this one embryo is going to go on to be a doctor, and that embryo is going to like save the world. At that point, it's not a fucking embryo anymore. It's a doctor. But I still refer to it as an embryo because conveniently that's what it was when we defined how to refer to that item, like as a variable in the previous section of conversation. You know what I mean? Like at one point, these were all probable futures, but just for the sake of convenience of language, we will continue to use the variable probable to refer to them.
Well, yeah, because we wouldn't call them futures anymore. But it's like, if I'm like, I get off the phone and I'm like, I'm not going to go to the party, sorry. And I'm like talking to the other person that's at my house, like an hour later while the party is happening somewhere else. And we know the party's happening somewhere else. I don't say like, oh, like that probability would have been an interesting choice. You say like that option, maybe, right? Like options is a better word because like probability is talking about the likelihood, right? Like it's attaching to a different quality of the option in that the option can be more or less likely. And that's what I'm at issue with here is like, it seems like to Seth, different options can't be more or less likely to happen. Or like when you call something when you call an option a probability, you lose the ability to say that different options have different probabilities, right? It's like if I have a die and on the die, like 3 of the sides just have like 1 and then the other sides have other numbers. I can't call every side of the die a probability and then also say one has a higher probability. You know, because those two things are now tracking different things. So that's why the likelihood of something is called the probability, right? And then the different states that could exist could be called like options or like states of being or something like that, right? Like that's why I don't like using probability to talk about like what are our discrete options, you know?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because that's why I asked about, you know, like your schooling and you're saying like, did you have statistics or did you learn?
I mean, we just had to take math for stuff.
Yeah, but did you have like this strong sense of the word probability means this certain thing before you found Seth? Because I think I just, by not having that, I just, like anything I'm reading, I'm like just trying to figure out what they mean.
Yeah.
I mean, I did take statistics, but I guess I'm just used to biology and chemistry and physics having terms that you also have a colloquial term for that is not usually the same meaning. So I just deal with it.
I'm more curious if, you know, I accept that you have this criticism, but like if going forward you were able to like paraphrase things in a better technical manner than even Seth that maybe helps us or the listener rather than just like, I mean, this grievance is going to be there because he's going to continue to use the term.
I mean, the way I see it is there's two ways that this could have happened. Seth chose the word probable for a really specific reason and to get us to think a certain way when we arrive at that word. Because there are synonyms, but synonyms always have connotations despite meaning the same thing. So there's that option. The other option is it was a distortion. And in that case, what the hell are you going to do about it? Like, this is probably the best material we've ever had coming from whatever the fuck you would call that. Like, what are you going to go back in time and tell Jane to just do better when she's already been, in my opinion, the best channel for this kind of information? You know what I mean? Like, it was either the right choice or it was the wrong choice, but it's just like we could sit here and debate about what is or is not a distortion. But the thing is, they were so careful with choosing words, especially when choosing ways to describe concepts that would be like really foundational to the material. That's why I don't think that he made a mistake in this regard. Because I think he would have gone back and been like, okay, this is a shit word to use. Because like he says, I don't like to use the word God. I would prefer to say all that is. But he could have just said very simply, and he said this before, I don't like using this word, but it's the closest approximation that you have a concept for in the English language or Western society.
Sure, yeah.
But he didn't for probable.
I think it's fun to like often give him the benefit of the doubt and then try to wonder like why he chose this. Like,
yeah,
like you're saying, of those two options that like he chose this specifically. And that's, I think it is a valid question. Like, you know, what term would you prefer? And like, you might come up with a better term in some way, but it might have its own flaws, you know, and all language is going to be that way to some extent.
I feel like option is a good option, but I think that carries connotations of like a permanence or finality, where it would make the reader less likely to think, okay, I've already chose, like, what I'm saying is if you choose the word option, or if Seth chose the word option, I think that it would give the reader the sense of like permanence, where if they chose an option, that's just what they're stuck with, versus if he continuously references them as probable realities, it lends the air more of like you still have the choice of weaving between these different timelines if you want. And you shouldn't think of yourself as so like stuck to the choices of your past, because he's literally telling us that we can change the past and that we can create the reality that we want. Does that make sense? Versus like in physical reality, because of our cause and effect thinking, usually when we say that we went with an option, we're just kind of stuck.
Yeah. And at this point, I don't know like how I can separate the connotations that I get from this material with word probabilities, but just hearing you explain that, like, I wanted to say like, yeah, but the word probability implies like a whole like dimension, where the option just seems so like commonplace, as we're like, it doesn't imply this like the actual power of what he's trying to convey here, that like you're changing everything basically by having this ability to choose in, you know, this concept of reality.
Well, I feel like option implies more choice, but like also I do want to clarify, like, I don't think probable as an adjective is at all problematic, because I think that's the correct use of probable, right?
Oh, you take issue with the noun.
The noun probability, right? Like that's the issue.
Yeah, I see what I'm saying.
So it would have better if he used probable reality
as opposed to probability.
I'll be honest, like maybe this is kind of mean of me.
Yeah.
But I think just from what I've witnessed, that in the 70s, I don't think that people were really learning that much about probability. Only because like when I meet people's grandparents, I see that they don't have as stringent of an education as you would expect people today do. Like kids today, you would expect them to know Sokotoa and all that stuff, physics, F equals MA, all that. I don't often meet people above a certain age who actually learn that stuff in their like regular high school, like for what they needed to get a high school diploma. Like in New York, that stuff is required to get a high school diploma. But I don't know any grandparents who had to learn that stuff. They usually just stopped after grade 5 and went on to get blue collar jobs. So like, I'm guessing that back then in the 70s, people didn't actually know that the noun form of probability meant like a percentage of something between 0 and 1.
I mean, I think people who are mathematicians did, right? But like Seth didn't.
I think Seth did, but he's speaking to regular people. He knows you have to write for your, like a good writer writes for their audience.
I don't know, man. Like, cause like, I'm just not inclined to like give him the benefit of the doubt and be like, oh, it's not that you had an error, it's that you had a distortion. You know, it's like, if you're wrong, then you're wrong and sorry, like, write it correctly next time. I don't know, you know, like I'd rather learn from someone who can to say it right.
I still think that it's going too far to not allow this usage to be its own usage. Like this is how there is like a definition 2, 3, 4, 5 of different words.
No, yeah, totally understandable. I'm just saying like that's the reason that to me, whenever it comes up, I cringe a little bit. Yeah. Where I'm just like, come on.
Listeners will have to let us know if they have strong opinion or insight on this subject.
A listener who has a PhD in mathematics, please write in and correct me.
229, you got something?
I just have the word probabilities written in my notes.
Okay, we got to that.
I mean, I guess technically, then you should take issue with all that is, because I'm looking up the definition of is, and one of them is to have an objective existence, have reality or actuality. But we're talking about like non-physical shit here, So like I was saying before, all that is would be in your, like by your logic, a really poor noun clause because it's not actually objective or actual physical.
That just reminds me of the Bill Clinton. That depends on what your definition of is.
That's a great cop out.
Joe, we're trying to have a philosophical discussion here.
If the dress has the spit, you must acquit.
Was that a thing? Oh my God. You know what? I'd gladly trade those presidential issues for the ones we have now, though.
I think he was more popular after that, too.
Yeah.
People were like, yeah, all right, Bill. Sure.
Definitely with people my age, But there are deep connections between yourself and all those individuals with whom you have had relationships and with whom you were involved in deep decisions. These are not nebulous. They are profound psychological interconnections that bind you each to each, particularly in a telepathic framework, though this may be beneath normal consciousness. The unrealized physical connections that might have occurred but did not are worked out in other layers of reality. So there is using other layers of reality rather than probabilities, but I think it's kind of the same term.
No.
No?
Do you remember when I told you before that Seth has said some things are impossible, such as regrowing a limb that you lost?
I remember that quote.
That would not be a probable future for, like, if you got your arm cut off. A probable future for you is not regrowing that flesh and arm with your actual genetics and stuff in it.
Yeah.
Maybe you could get like a robot one, but like
yeah, but does that relate to this?
I do think it relates to this because he says that, like, he's also referencing that there are some possibilities out there that would have to happen in non-physical reality, such as like your friend turning into a transformer.
Yeah, but I'm still not connecting it to what I just read there. Like
I'm saying that I think this sentence means that other unrealized futures can either occur in physical reality or non-physical reality, like in dream realities, where you and your friend might regrow your arms together and think of like what it would have been like to be, I don't know, an athlete. Does that make sense?
It's kind of like the crucifixion thing where it's like that never actually like took place in physical reality. It like by necessity had to happen like in this other sort of space.
Yeah, by necessity being it was like all parts of it would not fit into this reality, and we just have this like interpretation of what's able to bleed through.
Right. Where like when we say that some things are like possibilities, sometimes we mean that they have to happen on a different plane of existence than like this physical one.
Yeah. I think that's what he means by other layers of reality, not just other physical realities.
It's like if you ask a girl on a date and she says only in your dreams. It's not a probability, just a possibility.
Oh my God.
I'm not convinced. I mean, I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but like in this context, let me just read it again. But there are deep connections between yourself and all those individuals with whom you have had relationships and with whom you were involved in deep decisions. These are not nebulous. They are profound psychological interconnections that bind you each to each, particularly in a telepathic framework. Though this may be beneath normal consciousness, the unrealized physical connections that might have occurred but did not are worked out in other layers of reality. Like, I feel like he's saying kind of the same thing of like, we're talking about like you work with animals or an architect or you're a hobo. Like, it's kind of like the path that you didn't choose. That's what I'm getting from this sentence. That these other layers of reality are just literally other probabilities.
Like, presumably there's like a space in like the entity level where like your entity and their entity are involved in doing the like reality that's very like, to use a spatial word, like close to this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like in that reality, they're just having a whole fun time, like doing the other life together, and they're coordinating really closely because their lives are intertwined. So then, because your entity is close to that entity in that reality, in this reality, since you're the same entities, there's still sort of like a psychic closeness.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like a friendship that I've had like since 4th grade, and I don't know, like I'm not going to speak for their feelings, but like we've had a close bond, and it's always kind of been one of those things like you mentioned, like, you know, the one that gets away, but it was kind of one of those things where like they're single when I'm not, I'm single when they're not, kind of things. And like it just feels like in the same way, like I have the sense that like in some reality I've been a parent, in some reality like, you know, different things happen in that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what he's talking about here, relationships. Like that's why I'm like questioning like what is impossible about this.
I agree. And I don't know where it was. I'm pretty sure it was in one of the Dreams, Evolution, Value, Fulfillment books, where he says that like sometimes when you want something, you and that other person will live it out in dream reality and then decide, oh, this marriage is not for me. Let's not actually make it physical. That is a layer of reality. I think that's why he specifically chose. But the unrealized physical connections, meaning they were not physically realized, that might have occurred but did not, are worked out in other layers of reality. I think that's what he means, like dream reality or just astral reality or whatever. You tried it somewhere and you guys decided it was not worth pursuing physically.
You both became eagles and did the thing where you like fly down together.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. And I'm thinking of like that dream trial is something that we utilize at this level of decision making.
Definitely, yeah. But I think that like, for example, whoever you end up with permanently, you guys did also try it in the dream level, and you're like, yeah, let's actually make this physical. Like it can go both ways. You try it and you either say yes or you say no.
Yeah, I think kind of both things are true in that sense, that like we're talking about these distinctions between all these different Joes, and like I was just putting arbitrary numbers on before, but so many of them have this dream of what this relationship with this other person will be like, and in some realities they chose to enact that, and some they don't, and whatever extent they do or don't, you know, however you identify with them, that gets into like what is identity, right?
Yeah, that's another branch of the slime mold.
Yeah. The invisible environment within your mind is not as lonely as you might think, and your seeming inner isolation is caused by the ego's persistent guard. It sees no reason, for example, why you should be informed of information that it does not consider pertinent to day-to-day daily activities. I guess that refers to like in our example here, if like you feel like you have a connection with this person and you don't end up with them, and then you feel lonely because your ego isn't letting you feel like, in the sense that I have like some level of intuition that I have this connection with this person, even though it didn't like go anywhere, or, you know, like I have a life as a father or a mother, even though that's not obviously part of this lifetime. The ego doesn't let us, and it's understandable, right? Like why the ego does that. We have to figure out, you know, this lifetime before we can make this expansion.
I like that explanation for like gnomes and stuff too, where they're just like around, but your mind sort of filters them out because it's just like, that's too much trouble to deal with. We're not doing gnomes right now.
Not ready for the gnome level of reality.
Yeah.
Although we were talking on break, Joe might be getting close to that.
Yeah, we might go meet the gnomes someday soon. Catch me at the ferry circle.
I do have these next couple paragraphs here too. I think it leads right into what we're talking about in certain ways. I do not like the phrase to advance, yet in your terms, to advance as a consciousness is to become more and more aware of those other materializations of your own identity. The probable selves are to gain awareness of other probable selves and realize that all are various manifestations of true identity. They are not lost, buried, or negated in some super self without free will, self-determination, or individuality. Instead, the identity is what they are, with full freedom to express all probable actions and developments, both in this reality and in others that you do not know. It occurred to me this is like a version of ego transcendence. Normally, we get this idea that we have to like kill the ego, you know? But this sort of transcendence is like kind of realizing that there's these other versions of the egos, the outer egos, I guess, in Sethian terms, in these other probabilities. And by extension from those realizations, we get to this, what he here calls the true identity, which I guess is the entity.
The next one is kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
As you sit reading this book in your present moment of time, you are positioned in the center of a cosmic web of probabilities that is affected by your slightest mental or emotional act.
I like that.
Listener, do not get too freaked out about this one. I feel like this is one of those things that could cause someone to like drop into psychosis if they think about it too much.
I'm in the cosmic web.
Well, just the idea that like, because there's like the pattern recognition issues that people have where like you think about something and then all of a sudden you see something in your reality and you're like, oh, I manifested that. And then you get like so caught up in the loop of like trying to control your own like mental world so that you can affect the physical world, and seeing like the back and forth like between the two. Like that's what causes people to go schizophrenic, you know, or to go like manic or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can take that too far probably.
So just, you know,
it might be a fun experiment though.
Think about the cosmic web a little bit, but like take a break every once in a while. Like maybe every time you think about something, it doesn't necessarily have to make a reality in which that happens.
I think what I've struggled with, like I read that and I think that's cool. Like it lends like some like level of like high importance just to like every center of being, every subjective person is like their own universe. But like one thing I did struggle with, and maybe still do to some extent with this, is that like when he's talking about like your every thought, you know, like has its own reality or in some other layer of reality, whatever that means. Like we all have from time to time like pretty terrible thoughts, violent, shitty things. And like part of my struggle was like, and I think this is pretty common in this sorts of like, you know, from the very surface level, the secret sort of things, like this idea of you have like this bad thought and you have to like immediately like almost physically shake it from your head, you know, like I can't do that, you know, like it gives this like hyper responsibility to like controlling your thought and only having positive thoughts. And I think it's really unhealthy ultimately.
I agree. Yeah.
I guess it comes back to like examining like, why do I have this negative thought, and like getting to the root of it instead of like just trying to like whitewash the surface. That reaction just to like shake your head ends up being a way of repression. And then that whatever's causing that, it's probably like fear or something, just builds and becomes more toxic and comes out. And, you know, then sometimes it actually, people do act on those things sometimes. You know, we have a society where people snap and go postal or shoot up a school or some crazy shit, you know?
Yeah, it does bring up sort of the issue of like, how does moral culpability work if you're in this like probability space? Where like, listener, if you're wondering, just don't let them become actual. They can stay probable, just leave them in other realities, is where I would land on that.
I think that's a great starting point.
Right? Well, because like, you know what I'm talking about though, right? Like the idea of like, if there's two realities, and in one of the realities you imagine like drowning the random kid in the pool. And then in the other reality, because you imagined it in this reality, that means the other reality you must be drowning the kid in the pool. Are you in this reality? I'm pointing at my other finger for the audience who's only listening. In the first reality where you just imagined it, are you morally culpable for what you did in the other reality? You know?
I don't think so. I think the person that drowns the kid also has to choose to do that. They have to converge.
Now, how about this?
Okay.
If you're in the reality where you drown the kid, but the reason you drown the kid is to save yourself in the other reality from having to have drowned the kid. don't you have a good reason for doing it? Because you saved your other self from that moral harm.
I don't think it's generally thought to be like heroic to save yourself by drowning a child.
But if I stop you from drowning a child, that's a good thing, right? I've helped you by stopping you drown a child.
Okay, you got me there.
So why would I not be helping myself in another reality to not drown the child? You see what I'm saying?
I think
even to the extent that I'm sacrificing to help you. Like, doesn't that make it even better?
I think you have to look for a better way to help yourself not drown a child.
But if you're in this probability space, there's no way to escape it. One of your probabilities has to drown the child. You already thought about it.
I mean, realistically, it might be that child was acting like, a little twerp. And you imagine with great vividness and anger, you drowning a child, and that becomes one of the other layers of reality where you guys work out in a dream, and the kid is like, man, I had this dream last night where I was being like a little shit to the kids at the pool, and this huge adult drowned me, and then I was like, damn, maybe I shouldn't be so mean to the kids. And then you help the kid, and you help yourself, and it's no harm foul.
This, I mean, you may see this as like a cop-out, but like Seth will say elsewhere that the universe is designed to, you have to really, really dwell on negative things to create them in your own reality. Like, it's because if it wasn't set up that way, we would just kind of like create hell for ourselves. Like, the universe is much more inclined towards positive creation, constructive, I should say. And that's the way Seth often tells Rob and Jane, like, all these bad things that do happen are part of like a more ultimate constructive process.
And he's, I think in some example somewhere, he's said that like if you dwell on feelings of unsafety and things like that, and you dwell on it enough, then you basically telepathically put the call out for a thief to come and rob your house. But if all the thieves are busy that night, then it's not going to happen. And next night, same thing happens if you're still dwelling on that. Day after day after day, eventually you will get robbed, but it was consensual in a sense that like, this is what you mentally chose to focus on. And that other person needed somebody to rob. So you guys will meet and agree like telepathically, like this is what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
He says, and this is a really touchy subject for some, there are no accidents. There are no coincidences. So some people are like, well, how can that be when bad things happen to seemingly innocent people?
Yeah.
But yeah, basically the victim and the victimizer agree on what's going to happen. I mean, we could do a whole episode on just like how thorny that is, but
I feel like we have on like half an episode before.
We've touched on it for sure. I mean, with good reason. I think it is rightly controversial, but like,
if we're all the same being, then the wolf eating the sheep is actually just the wolf sheep eating the wolf sheep.
Well, and I think of it in terms too of like, we always use the video game analogy, but like, you can play the game as many times as you want. Why not like jump into the dragon's mouth one of the times?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
you might find a glitch.
Like that's something almost any child playing a game will experiment with. Like knowing the stakes are like, I guess that's when you come to these higher realizations, understanding if it's true that we have all these probable lives, that the stakes are lower, right?
Mm-hmm. There's a reason that kittens are born in such large litters. It's because half of them are designed to just be drowned.
Or mosquitoes, right?
Or mosquitoes. Yeah. If they wanted the kitten to live, they'd only have one of them. Duh.
This is an episode where we're gonna have to be like, we don't think any kittens or children were drowned in the taping of this episode, but we can't be sure about other probabilities. That's our show, but fear not, the never-ending conversation continues next week. If you're enjoying the show, please be so kind as to subscribe, like, rate, and review, and if you're feeling frisky, tell a friend. Contact us at implicatingthereal@gmail.com. You can support the show at patreon.com/implicatingthereal. We are doing our best, but whatever support you can lend helps us appreciably. We are not affiliated with the publishers or proprietors, but we encourage you to get the books. You can follow along as we endeavor to dive deep into the Sethian worldview, and there's really nothing like cultivating your own relationship with the material. Until next week, we wish you a fun good evening.